Hi there. If you've used Bricks Builder for any length of time, you'll agree with me that the default mobile menu icon is quite boring and bland. However, in this video, I'm going to be showing you how you can replace that icon with something more interactive and interesting that will help your websites stand out. So here we are inside of the Bricks Builder header template, and what I have here is a pretty standard setup. I have the logo and a nav nestable element, which by the way should not be confused with the regular nav menu. So the nav nestable element comes with its own predefined structure of items. Now what I have here is a standard setup. I've not made any major changes except to add a few CSS classes to style the nav links. One more thing that I've done is I've deleted the toggle close icon that usually comes as part of the nav nestable, because I can always toggle it either open or close using this single icon, which by the way is only visible in the mobile breakpoint. Now, speaking of the toggle icon, this is our focus for today's tutorial. By default, you'll agree with me that the control options here are rather limited. However, we can also replace that with a custom SVG icon, and this is the option we're going to take advantage of in this tutorial. Think about this. What if we could upload our own special SVG icon that has its own CSS classes packed in, which we can then reference and customize using custom CSS in the Bricks Builder custom CSS panel? Now, all that might sound like a mouthful, but it's really simple, and I'm going to show you as you follow along in this video. Recently, I came across a pen by Michael Einarlem, which features these hamburger icons. At first glance, it looks like your regular hamburger icon. However, when you click on these icons, you get these really interesting animations that seem they should be impossible to do using just CSS. When you finally understand how simple these animations are to implement, it's actually quite interesting to witness. And so I'm going to be breaking them down. As complex as this seems, it's really simple. You just got to think about two main properties, which I'm going to show you shortly. Now, all this might sound complicated with all the extra snippets and code. So I decided to create my own pen and create a very simple version of the hamburger or menu icon that we can then break down together. So right here we have a button that contains the SVG icon which we are animating, and inside of this SVG we have two parts. Now these are the parts that make up the lines for this icon. These are the parts that we will manipulate. So at first glance, when I click here, you see how it flows, and it's really interesting. Like, how then do we achieve those curves? That should be absolutely impossible in CSS. But there's a lot more going on here. So for us to see what's really happening here, let's delete part of this code. And I've tried commenting it out, but for some reason it didn't work. So I'm just going to copy, or rather cut it out, and we can see how everything really flows. So what we have here are two paths. If I can zoom in, hopefully. What we have here are two paths that kind of overlap each other. And so all we are really doing is hiding parts of those paths and adjusting the position of the so-called gap or mask as we animate the icon. Now, here's a pure explanation so you can get what's really going on here. I'm going to copy the SVG as it is and paste it in a design software. In this case, I'm going to be using Affinity Designer because it's got the complete stroke functions that can really mirror what we are doing in CSS. So I'll paste it here, and right away it seems like we just have this meaningless blob of shapes. But I'll turn off the fill. I'll turn off the fill and add a stroke, a 1-point stroke, and straight away you can see the shape begin to show up. One more thing to make it more like what we had on the web is the cap. So I'm going to add a round cap just to add that extra effect. Another thing I'll do is select the first stroke on the first curve as according to Affinity Designer, and I'll make it red. so it stands out. Then I'll place this just right above here. Now this is for illustration purposes, but I'll come back and return the CSS that I deleted initially. So we have this going on, and then we'll reference these values as we go. Now, two properties I really want you to keep in mind when it comes to the technique for animating these SVG paths are the stroke dash array and the stroke dash offset, and I'll explain how they work. First of all, the stroke dash array, if you've got any background in design, maybe using Illustrator or Affinity Designer in this case, you'd be familiar with the option to convert a stroke appearance to dash, so you can change the line to a dash line style like we see here. So I have this red path for now, and when I set it to dash line style, you notice these dashes get repeated, the line breaks, and you have this pattern of repeated line segments. Now this is what in CSS we refer to as the stroke dash array, but in this case you have the line, the gap, line, gap, and so on. So whatever we do here with these figures will determine the look of the line. So when I set this to 3, it means you got 3 units for the line segment and 1 unit for the gap, and we can manipulate these values however we want, and depending on how we manipulate these values, we can get the pattern repeated across the line path. Having said that, we are going to be using only 2 values, just like we saw in the CSS. So let's move this. I believe here we had for the first line we had 24 and 31, so that's the array. We could have more numbers here and it's going to adjust the stroke accordingly, but here we have just 2 numbers that define the array pattern, and that's what we're taking advantage of. So we have 24 and 31, and now see what happens when I raise these numbers to the same values, 24 and 31. Now nothing seems to be happening because we also have one more option that we are neglecting, which is the stroke dash offset. At this point, the stroke dash offset is set to 0. So we'll do the same here. Right now it's disabled in Affinity Designer, so we don't see the complete effect. But the moment I turn it off here, because right now it's set to balance, which means the software is actively trying to balance the flow of the strokes and gaps. But when I turn this off, we can now control this with our own values. And right away, you see the rest of the line disappears, and we have this solid line that flows from right to left. I'm going to hide this second curve so you see what's really happening here. So what if we needed to animate this? What if we could animate the position of this line in CSS? We can do that using the phase property, or in this case, the stroke dash offset property. So let's try that. As I raise these numbers, you see how it flows. Now I don't want it flowing through the invisible break in the line, so I'm going to give it a negative direction instead. So let's move this downwards in the negative, and you see how it flows. Now that's exactly what's happening on a larger scale in our CSS snippet. Now if you're able to manipulate these values using the CSS animation options, we can get some brilliant effects using the CSS snippets that we have there. The same is going on here. I'll just replicate the same thing with this second stroke, and we'll proceed now to explain the rest of the code. And immediately you can see that exact same shape is replicated. Now if you want a complete line displayed, you can do the same as well. You can raise these values to somewhere around 24. That's fine, or maybe even 25. Yeah, so 25 does it, and we have the complete line. So again, we are just manipulating this whole thing and adjusting it. Now let's take another look at the animation, what we have here. When I click here, you notice how so many things are happening at the same time. But there's one more thing that's happening whenever we click on the button. is that the SVG icon overall gets rotated as a whole. So this is why we have this snippet here, this line of code here that says rotate 45 degrees. So what's happening, I'll again simulate that in the editor. So I'll turn on there's a rectangle here. I'm just going to turn that on. I'll give it a stroke as well so you can see it. So imagine these are the boundaries of our entire SVG file. Now, when I click on that active icon, what happens is it gets rotated as a whole by 45 degrees. And at the same time as it gets rotated, the phase or the stroke dash offset gets adjusted so that both lines converge in the middle as one line. So let me just play that out quickly. All right, and sometimes you have to make adjustments. So as we simulate this, we have to make adjustments to the length of the line so that we're able to sell that illusion that both lines are currently overlapping perfectly. And then one of these lines have to get rotated as well so that it gives us that X. Now, of course, we have the transform origin wrong here. So if I rotate this now, you see we have that X happening. And that's exactly what's going on, except that all three animations are happening at about the same time. Now, if we need to make it more interesting, we can then vary the duration of both animations, which is what I've done here with the stroke dash array set to 400 milliseconds, the stroke dash offset set to 600, and the SVG rotate set to 200. Now, when we combine all of these together, this is what we get. One more thing I would explain about this snippet is that the button has a JavaScript attribute, has the onClick attribute, which contains a JavaScript method that implements an active class. So essentially what we're doing with the animation is when the active class gets appended to the button class, do these things. So this is what I have as this part of the code. So when the active class is appended to the list of classes for the button, we have that rotation take place. So the overall SVG, the whole SVG file gets rotated 45 degrees. And then when the active class is also present up here, do this to the first line. So I have that nth of type 1, and it adjusts the stroke dash array and the stroke dash offset. And the same happens with the second line as well. Adjust it so we have this result as we see it. On a larger scale, that's exactly what's really going on with these animations. Everything is really just a mask, so to speak. And then what we do is manipulate that mask to give us these really sleek and interesting animations. The next question is, how then do we implement this inside of Bricks Builder? Now, back inside of Bricks Builder, remember the first step, as I said, was to upload our own special SVG file. And the second step would be to implement the CSS snippet so we can then control how it behaves. So first of all, let's get the SVG file. From here, the example that I have, I'll just select the SVG. Be careful to select the SVG, not the button. The button is just the regular HTML button, but what we are really concerned about is the SVG file itself. So just copy this and open up your Notepad or VS Code, copy that into a new file there. So now you can save this as an SVG file. So be sure to set the file type to SVG. The next thing I'll do is upload it directly into my WordPress dashboard. So now I have it uploaded here. There's no thumbnail visible, nothing happens. Just continue, it's fine. So insert that. And again, you see the thumbnail looks broken and nothing is really happening. And here we have something strange going on. I believe that icon there is quite familiar. The next thing we need to do is go into the style panel and paste our custom CSS. So we'll come back here to the pen and copy the CSS. Be careful to copy only to ham1. So the rest, like BG and body, we don't need. So we just need to get it from ham1. I'll copy everything here. and paste. And straight away, you see exactly the same icon is visible. But there's one more thing before you go about celebrating. I'll just save this. Something happens when we click, that animation is not happening, and it's kind of, it gets worrisome. Okay, why is it not happening? When you click the button, a class gets added to the list of classes attached to the button. So you click here, and what we see is this class named isActive. I'll just come over here, is-active. Okay, now when I save after implementing that update to the code, watch what happens now. Amazing, right? Now, one more thing is you may want to change the color of that first part to just make it black all through. So we can do that. And for line 1, you can just delete this line, the stroke red line, and we'll have the completely black menu icon. And so that's how you can get this really interesting SVG icon inside of Bricks Builder. Now, if you'd like to use one of the animated hamburger icons in this code pen, I've created a fork of this pen that is adapted for Bricks Builder. So it's going to make it easier for you to copy any of these icons and implement them on your website. So let's assume we're trying to use the 8 icon. That'll be ham8 in the HTML code. So the first step will be to copy the appropriate SVG element and upload that onto your website's media gallery. And then the second step would be to copy the appropriate CSS classes. Here I'm going to scroll till I find ham8, copy into a notepad. The next thing we'll do is upload that file into the media gallery. Now, for the CSS, there are 2 main parts you need to identify and copy. The first part would be the global classes. These are classes that are applied across the board to all the buttons, so they don't change from button to button. And then the second part will be the classes that are directed to that specific button. So we'll start with the global classes. I've created a comment here to help you identify that part and copy it out. So from start to end, I'll copy that and paste in my custom CSS panel. Enter. And then we'll take the second part, which is the part directly for ham8. So I'll scroll down here and select ham8. I've also placed a comment here for ham8, the start of ham8. I'll copy that and paste in my CSS panel. And our hamburger menu icon is ready. If I reload here, you'll notice I have the icon here and it works perfectly. Now, there are a few things you can keep in mind when working with this. For one, you can adjust the size of the icon here. I've created a special class here that allows you to set the size of the icon depending on what you want in your web build. So yours could be smaller or larger. Whatever you want, you can do with that. Another thing you can do is to set the color of the stroke. Now, this here is hidden as is part of the, I believe is part of the classes that we have here. So let's see, under the line class, you can set the stroke color. At the moment we have pure black, so you can change that to something else, maybe like red, and you can update the stroke color there. So it's pretty simple. I've not done too much to change the code apart from changing the classes to like the active class to isActive, which is what Bricks Builder appends to the menu. So that's pretty much it, and I hope it's easy. As time goes on, I'm going to create more custom animated icons, which hopefully will be shared in my code pen, which I'm also going to link in the descriptions below. But for now, that's the quick and dirty way to have your own custom animated icons that help your website stand out and look somewhat different than every other Bricks website out there. Till I see you in the next video, thanks for watching.